Senator Tillis, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thank you.
You have been one of Congress's most active voices on intellectual property protection and patent law. I know this isn't a personal issue for you, but what's behind your push?
Well, the issue, it really dates back to when I was in high-tech industry back in the mid-'80s. I was at Wang Laboratories in Boston, and I really understood the value of patent protection because it was a deal killer. If you couldn't recoup your investment, then there are a lot of good ideas that never came to light. Okay, so fast forward now, I'm in the Senate, and we have this we have all of these decisions made by courts that are confusing, that are very, very difficult for new inventors to determine whether or not they're even going to get a shot at getting a patent because the jurisprudence around eligibility is very difficult. I'm a non-attorney, I'm a management consultant, but confusion stifles innovation. Uncertainty stifles innovation. Other jurisdictions are doing a better job of allowing, particularly some of the new technologies like biotech, information technology. We're going to see it with AI applications, hardware and software. I think impediments to at least getting your day in the U.S. Patents and Trademarks Office to try and be eligible, to then build your case for getting a patent, seems like the right and reasonable thing to do. Other jurisdictions are doing it. I don't want innovation to go to other jurisdictions that are more accommodating.
In a world where AI is making it harder and harder to determine originality and reality, you've sponsored a bipartisan bicameral bill, the Patent Eligibility Restoration Act. What would that bill do to help address the issues you've just laid out?
Well, that's exactly it. We call it PARA, and it's right around that eligibility. It's basically giving inventors and creators an opportunity and at bat, getting an opportunity to then build their case. This is not guaranteeing that they will actually receive a patent. It's just opening the aperture, instructed by new technologies, that the hodgepodge of decisions and jurisprudence makes it very difficult for somebody to decide whether or not they want to make the investment. So that's what PARA is all about. And we're hoping, I think, that we will be successful with having a hearing this year and really trying to move it forward. Some of the tech sector is worried about it. I get their concern, but I believe we can address their concerns and really stimulate innovation, get it right, and continue the U.S. as the world's innovation economy.
Well, speaking of innovation, there are some other programs out there like STTR and SBIR that have lapsed in their authorization. Is that another part of the key to fostering innovation?
Yeah, I think anywhere that we can, the United States, if you think about it, it's still remarkable. I think one of the reasons why I developed an interest in IP after I got into the Senate, aside from my own background in technology, was really understanding how novel the concept of intellectual property protections were in a written constitution. I really believe that that's foundational to our success as a nation. So we've got to constantly remove any sorts of impediments to these creative minds, people that come to this country because they know it's a society and an economy that thrives on innovation. So we should be the leader in always evolving and making sure, number one, that people, other institutions, other creators' rights are not infringed upon, but give everybody an at-bat. That will make us continue to be the 1,000-pound gorilla in innovation in the world.
We've heard some recent warnings that China has actually overtaken us, especially in pharmaceutical manufacturing and some other areas of innovation. You've warned about that yourself. How does PARA work to equalize the competition space?
Well, it gives us more at-bats. China, one of the reasons why China's been so successful is they steal our intellectual property. I mean, my goodness, probably the best example of that is a well-documented case of Huawei. I mean, Cisco said that there was a formula with Huawei about 6 months after they put out a new innovation. Huawei reverse engineers it, sells it for a lower price point. Okay, now maybe they're cleaning up their act a little bit, but we all need to be real here. China's success in innovation is founded on the theft of intellectual property that largely was created from the United States. Now they're becoming a world power. They're probably going to have a little bit more rule of law, but now they've got a baseline, a capability of innovation that we should take pause and make sure that we can match up against. PARA, Prevail, other things that we're doing here are specifically for that purpose.
So you mentioned another law, proposed law there, the Prevail bill. What else is on your legislative agenda when it comes to intellectual property?
Well, we're going to continue to go after felony streaming. We've got a lot more work to do with copyright protection. AI just really creates all kinds of wonderful potential and disturbing potential for intellectual property theft. We've had some great success with digital felony streaming, those sorts of things. So more law and order enforcement, holding platforms accountable when they're obviously prospering from stolen content. Those sorts of things are a part of the legacy I hope to leave behind in my remaining days in the Senate.
I want to change topics a little bit and talk about disaster preparedness and disaster response. Your state, North Carolina, has suffered through some pretty significant weather-related catastrophes in the recent past. You've sponsored a new bill, the Disaster Assistance Simplification Act. Tell us what that would do and how that would affect your constituents and others.
Yeah, this is an area where I can get pretty emotional pretty quickly. And by emotional, I mean angry when I see bad execution. When you're in a storm, North Carolina is always prone to have a storm. It's, now it's as likely to happen in the mountains as it is on the coast. We saw Helene, almost $60 billion damage in North Carolina. We also saw it at the worst possible time when the administration is rightfully trying to look at DOGE, they call it the Department of Government Efficiency, but you don't make things more efficient by creating more paperwork. Okay, we already had too much paperwork before DOGE came, and now we have people in Western North Carolina having to fill out 2 forms that are essentially the same information. I not only want to eliminate that, I want to have one submission used multiple times. We need to let local emergency responders, county commissions, town, state officials focus on recovering the almost 250,000 people affected by Helene alone. So the idea is paperwork simplification, process simplification, reducing the number of approvals to the bare minimum necessary to make sure that people are accountable, but getting the money to the local governments. My goodness, we've had reimbursements for debris removal alone take a year? Seriously? Yancey County? I mean, their entire budget's at risk because the Homeland Security and FEMA are moving too slowly. So all of our work here is really with an eye towards compressing the time to execution, simplifying what people who are by definition in a stressful, disastrous state. It's okay to be in an ivory tower in Washington, saying, well, you got to fill out these extra forms because we're all about efficiency. You do that when you've lost a town and see whether or not that efficiency makes sense then. And in fact, it's not efficient. Our bill actually tries to do just the basic activity-based accounting, basic process execution, simplification I did for a career at Price Waterhouse, just applied to FEMA and to Homeland Security more broadly.
The very agency that would need to accomplish all of this, FEMA, it has been in the crosshairs of DOGE and the administration. Are you comfortable that the agency has the capacity to do what this bill would ask it to do?
Well, I've got serious concerns with Secretary Noem. I mean, let's face it. She was a governor of a state that has roughly the population of Mecklenburg County. They don't have a lot of experience with disasters. So we can separate the issue of Homeland Security and only focus on FEMA. She simply doesn't have the real life experience to understand why this stuff has to move so quickly. And so what we're trying to do is get people on the ground, see what we have to deal with almost every year. There is some level of disaster, sadly, almost every year, certainly every 2 or 3 years in North Carolina. Learn from subject matter experts. Learn from emergency management operations at the state that have it right. The Southeast has some extraordinary best practices. Secretary Noem and Director of FEMA would do well to come in and understand those best practices, institutionalize them as a part of the practices of FEMA. But you have to keep in mind, months ago, the Secretary of Homeland Security thought that maybe FEMA could be eliminated. That was a bad idea. FEMA not only needs to stay in place, there's an argument as to whether or not it should be a cabinet level position, and you got to have pros who really understand emergency management and disaster response. Otherwise, we're slow to execute. That affects the economy. It affects human lives, and it's just not the way to actually run a top tier operation like we expect FEMA should be.
Well, we're still waiting for the administration's commission report on its plans for FEMA. What are you hearing there?
I haven't heard anything specifically. I'm going to put that under a microscope. You know, I was an enterprise transformation. I was a partner of Price Waterhouse. I did enterprise transformation. I understand large, complex organizations, worked in them, advised them. So I'm looking forward to the report. But what I'm really looking forward to is the execution.
Well, as we've just heard here, sir, you haven't been shy about calling out members of the executive branch, but the focus really is now around oversight. What do you see as Congress's most urgent priorities when it comes to oversight of the executive branch?
Well, I'll go back to Homeland Security or FEMA in particular. We've done an exhaustive analysis where actually some of the people that have looked at the results of our analysis have asked us to share information with them, and these are analysts themselves. What I asked my staff to do, I said, just do a side-by-side comparison of Trump's first administration and this administration. We had Florence and Matthew recovery efforts in Trump's first administration. Now we have Helene. So let's compare the two. Let's just see from a baseline, are they performing at the same level? There cannot be a more stark contrast. So at that point, you have to also understand, well, what's different? Well, if you're running fundamentally the same processes, what's different? Well, it could be the distractions of DOGE. It could be a lack of leadership or experience or prioritization. That's how I go about looking at oversight. Now, I'm using Homeland Security as an example. I could move into any other agency and ask the same sort of question, whether I'm on the Banking Committee, Finance, or Judiciary. To me, it's about process execution, minimum level of effort for maximum impact. That's how I go about it when I'm in these oversight hearings. So we'll be doing a lot of them over the next I'd say 4 to 8 months before we get into the political silly season, and we won't be doing a lot of oversight.
In our current political environment, where do you see the most potential for bipartisan agreement as you broach that oversight agenda?
But I find a lot of, every day I'm looking for bipartisan agreement. I've done it when Democrats were in the White House, and I've done it when President Trump was in the White House before, and we'll do it again. The way, I mean, you just got to be realistic. I don't believe, you know, there's some people here that think can't we all be friends and bipartisan? That's inherently antithetical to the American experience. It's a two-party system. So we know that a significant number of things that we deal with, we're going to put on our jerseys and disagree and see if we can get the votes. But my gosh, there's so many opportunities to work within the 35-yard lines, the ideological 35-yard lines. That's where I think we can do our great work. We need to. I'll give you an example. I think that the SAFE Act, a lot of people are trying to polarize it now. But Joe Biden allowed almost 8 million people to come into this country with what was effectively an open borders policy. I believe that we could build bipartisan agreement to maybe put the SAVE Act in place, which says that states still have to run their election systems. But isn't it reasonable now that we have nearly 25 million people illegally present to make sure that they're not on the voter rolls and to provide adequate documentation to do that? In exchange for that, maybe we can talk about other immigration reform policy, codifying some of the very successful border policy that I believe helped get President Trump elected. So you're always kind of moving things around and see how they gel as a package to get those magical 60 votes you need in the Senate, and then the House has to do what the House does.
Well, sir, you mentioned a minute ago the political silly season. You yourself have said you're not running for re-election. What are you hoping to accomplish in these last few months while you're in the Senate?
Well, you know, I think that without the trappings of having to run for re-election, with a knowledge of the organizing resolution and the weight that my vote carries in key committees, I'm going to use that power judiciously, but I'm going to use it forcefully on issues that I feel very strongly about. And the issues I feel strongly about are not a personal motivation. To me, it's a focus on making sure that we execute exquisitely. I hate failed execution, and the politics of failed execution are real. When we miss the opportunity, a good example is, say, Minnesota. You know, there are some people on the Republican side of the aisle that are trying to rationalize away that by saying, well, most Americans think illegally present people should be deported. I do too. What I don't think we should be doing is the nonsense in Minneapolis. There's a smart, sustainable, respectful way to implement deportation policy, And there's the dumpster fire that's occurring in Minnesota. And respectfully, it's deadly. And so a part of what I'm trying to do is use my position to say, guys, I don't disagree with the what. I believe that most people should be deported if they're illegally present, if they came here illegally. If they're seeking asylum, let them go through the process. If they are afraid of the consequences of being deported back to their country, then let's find a safe third country that will receive them. That is a calm, methodical, explainable way to go about doing what's being done. In Minnesota, it's the absolute opposite of it. It's irresponsible, it's unsustainable, and it will have political consequences if my Republican colleagues do not stand up and help the president be successful in something, the what, that I agree with. That's one example.
Senator Thom Tillis from North Carolina, thank you so much for joining me today, sir.
Thank you.